There's no plot! It is infuriating how difficult it is to talk about this book at this point, because this is the third time I have sat down, cleared out an entire afternoon to try to talk about chapters 5 and 6. Chapters 5 and 6 are perhaps the most meaningless in the entire book. Norman must have thought that chapter 4, the kidnapping chapter, was so great that it deserved a 2-chapter-long recap. The plot smashes into a brick wall and just stops, while we get this meaningless backstory from other character perspectives detailing Theresa's kidnapping and events surrounding that, which ultimately lead nowhere. So you get to go 2 chapters where the plot doesn't move. And if that wasn't bad enough, there are so many inconsistencies, not just with basic writing tropes or common sense or anything like that. There are basic inconsistencies within itself. The timeline is so confusing, I'm still not sure what's going on. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, some housekeeping things, because I still had stuff set up so you understand how bizarre this book is. Now you gotta consider how many notes I have taken for this book. Consider the tabs I buy. They all come in these little sleeves that have 100 each. I've gone through so many sleeves of tabs. 13. I'm missing one, but there are more than 1,300 tabs in this. And to repeat myself from last time, I did not take all the notes that I could have, because at one point I decided to just go along and try to actually get a video out by the end of the year. Now I've made a mess. So there should be more notes. Also, the grammar mistakes that I kept finding, mostly missing commas, places where the sentences desperately need a pause so you understand what's going on, or you've got end quotes and the sentence continues but there's no comma. Stuff like that happens, I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of times. I would just put one yellow tab for a writing mistake on one of those pages and not actually highlight every single grammatical error. There are actually a few that I missed. I wasn't paying enough attention. As I'm going through this again, I can see a few spots where I didn't actually catch a typo. That is an objective mistake. That is not a matter of opinion. And then there's the sheer amount of notes that I've had to take. Now, most of these reviews are based on about 20 pages of notes. 14 to 20 on average. Reaper's Creek was 26. Empress Theresa. I've decided not to print out my notes. I normally prefer to read off of paper. It's just easier for me. If I had done that with Empress Theresa, I would have wasted 122 pages. I am not exaggerating. I have 122 pages of notes. There are books shorter than that, which is why I'm reading everything off of my computer. It's a complete waste. And if anyone's wondering, these are all blank, so have not used them. Part of that is because as I've been going along with these videos, I've been getting a little better at taking notes, but also, like I've said in the last review, some of these mistakes are like compounded mistakes, and it only gets worse as the book goes along, partially because they start contradicting with previous notes within the book itself. Why would Theresa need thermal underwear if she generates heat? All of the timeline issues, because we are not done with that. Multiple character inconsistencies and characters who only exist to make Theresa look good. And the crowd supporting her, who happen to be the most easily led flock of sheep in existence. Literally brainwashed masses are less easily convinced. Oh, and before I get into this proper review, there is one other thing I wanted to go over. The commercial that about half the comments section in my last video was good enough to remind me it was an actual Amazon commercial. You see, I didn't look into that. The idea, the way it was presented, sounded so stupid that I thought Norman was just making it up. I had managed to not see that particular commercial. But it turns out it's real. It was a commercial that Amazon put out, and Norman misrepresented it terribly. The way that he presented it, he actually said the commercial was about selling a dog door for miniature horses. And it's not. It is an advertisement for Amazon Prime, because they're saying, we've got a lot of weird stuff and we can get it to you fast. That was the point of the commercial. That was what was being sold, not dog doors for horses. You can see why I didn't bother looking into it. All right, but enough backstory. Let's get into this. So, Chapter 5, Theresa is dead. Oh, I'm sorry, did you think that she survived her epic belly flop? Because she didn't. Sort of. I mean, she survived the initial impact, but she was out on the water for like 2 weeks. Sort of. I'm actually not sure, because this is where it starts to get really confusing. But Theresa screams, wakes up, and is actually in a hospital room. And she has a very special guest. There were doctors and nurses around me, and I recognized Peter Blair, the popular Prime Minister of England whom I'd often seen on the news. Small note, so it's actually Peter Blair, not Tony Blair, like some people may have thought. I should have specified, but there's so much wrong with this book that I only have so much time to actually go over everything. Some things will slip by me. And I can't really say that Peter Blair is based on Tony Blair. I don't know of many character traits that the two share, but I don't think there's anything really substantial beyond the same last name. I'll bet my secret is out. It is. Terrific. Some maniac will kill me in a week. How did you get to me in time? We didn't. You've been dead for 2 weeks. I am confused by this. I'm gonna actually derail this for a moment, because the timeline in this book is something of a nightmare. The majority of it takes place when Theresa is 18. And that's fine, it functions well enough there, but when it comes to small differences, Norman doesn't really do anything to keep track of what's going on. So we're told that Theresa has been dead for 2 weeks. Now, does that mean that she was out in the water, in the ocean for 2 weeks, where she landed after jumping out of the jet? Does it mean that she was in the hospital for 2 weeks? Does it mean that it took 2 weeks to get her back? I honestly don't know. I've gone over this section like 4 times, and it does not make sense. The way it's told is Theresa was out on the water. I believe that's what the 2 weeks is supposed to represent. She was then found by a British naval ship that hauled her on board. A doctor checked her out. She was still alive at that point, and then she died more or less in the doctor's arms. She was then brought back to England, where she was put in a hospital room, still dead, mind you, and they spent 14 hours reviving her. Now, I'm no medical expert myself, but I find it odd that England's healthcare professionals would stuff a 2-week dead corpse in a hospital room, taking up much needed space, and then spend 14 hours reviving her. And you can excuse a lot of that with, oh, well, Hal just stepped in and used his superpowers to do blah, 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 and that's how she was revived. Okay, that's fine. My question is, why did a bunch of doctors decide, wow, this girl's been dead, this otherwise random girl has been dead for 2 weeks, let's try to bring her back to life? You're not talking about medical science at that point. That's Dr. Frankenstein shit. Also, what's the motivation for this? Theresa is otherwise insignificant. Yes, England knows about Hal and about her powers and that stuff. But she's been dead for 2 weeks. Why would they expend any degree of effort to try to bring her back? We're not talking about like Commander Shepard, someone who is uniquely qualified to help save the universe. Theresa is an otherwise boring 18-year-old who doesn't stand out in any significant way, aside from the fact that she's got an alien spooge monster inside of her. They don't even know anything about how, or if he can be revived or used at this point, or if he means anything, or if there's anything worth studying. They don't even try to do anything with Hal. It's all about reviving Theresa, because Theresa is the super special one. She's the one they have to focus on. As far as their motivation, it all comes down to saving Theresa. Hal is irrelevant. I do think that there is one thing that should be pointed out, though, and we'll get to this later on, but the way that Hal's powers work, or Theresa's powers through Hal, however you want to qualify it. But if the human brain is deprived of oxygen for more than a couple of minutes, it basically ceases to function. Even if you do revive somebody who drowned and was not breathing for like 10 minutes, you have a chance at reviving that person. It's uncommon, but it can happen. That person, however, will probably be brain dead. The body will still maintain basic functions, heartbeat, breathing, things like that. But they'll never really function mentally again. You can get around that through the use of Hal as a plot device, but his powers won't work that way, and I'll explain later. Anyway, getting back into this. So Theresa wakes up in a hospital room in front of the Prime Minister of England, one of the most powerful people on the planet. What do you think her first question is going to be? What happened? How did you find me? Where's my family? Am I going to be okay? None of that. Could my anonymity still be preserved? I'll bet there's a lot of news stories about me. About 1 million if you include all languages around the world. You are discussed continuously. No anonymity? Anybody say anything bad about me? No, I have seen nothing negative. This edition came out in 2016. Twitter's a thing. I call bullshit. When she was in high school, several trolls created websites in order to mock her, just because she was on the baseball team. Are you saying that no one is saying anything bad about her? Also, how does this work? I can understand how she's a news item because she was found in the ocean after escaping an atom bomb explosion, and good luck hiding that. But this was a part of Theresa's plan the whole time in case that her powers became known publicly. She wanted to make sure that she had a good record. I knew I might become famous and kept myself squeaky clean. People with problems can be interesting too. Yeah, well, people with problems don't change the world. I challenge you to find me one person who did anything significant in the world who did not have problems. George Washington changed the face of the planet, and he was fighting the strongest military in the world at the time. I bet you he had more than a few problems. But eventually Blair leaves and Theresa gets some help cleaning up. The nurses took other things off me, including a thermometer out of my you-know-what. I understand that Norman is trying to make a family-friendly story out of this, and that's perfectly fine. But by Theresa saying my you-know-what, she sounds like a child. She's 18 in this scene. Look, I don't know if Norman has a problem with the word vagina or not, but if he doesn't want to use that particular word or reference it, perfectly fine. I would recommend a very old writing technique, though. This one's actually kind of ancient. It's very simple. If you don't want to write about something, then don't write about it. I actually have to explain this to somebody. And this is a paragraph after he used the word electroencephalograph. Norman, come on, man. You know better than that. And I don't know if Norman is trying to praise English healthcare services or mock them relentlessly, because if he is, bravo, sir, for this line. I was still wearing the clothes I had on when I fell in the ocean. So I didn't mention this, but when Theresa was found, she was found floating in a, I guess, pocket of blood. It doesn't feel right to call it a pool of blood, but sharks went after her, of course, and Hal had an auto defense program that basically shredded them into chum, which attracted more sharks, which led to more chum. So Theresa was floating in a whole bunch of blood in the middle of the ocean with all that salt water. So her clothes are so crusty with dried salt water and blood that if you patted her on the shoulder, her clothes would disintegrate. Why didn't they put her in a hospital gown? I mean, aside from just a basic examination, what if there was an infection or something? Oh, I guess it's lap time now, huh? That's fine, I like hard mode. So, Theresa has just woken up. She's been awake for, I don't know, maybe a couple of minutes, maybe a couple of hours. Book doesn't really indicate anything. Long enough to go get some fish and chips, I guess. But in that time, Blair asks Theresa to do him a favor. Can I go to the hotel now? Of course. But first, would you mind coming upstairs to the sunroom and let television cameras see you? Your family will see you. She hasn't been cleared by the doctors yet. He's a prime minister, not a medical expert. And she was dead for 2 weeks. Is it safe to let her walk around now? My assumption is no. The doctors warned me you might revive briefly, but soon sicken and die. It would be like radiation sickness. First nausea within the hour, then rapid deterioration. It couldn't be stopped. I'm glad it didn't happen. What? More mysteries to find out about later. Yeah, spoilers, they never find out or investigate. Well, it looks like all the millions of news articles and stories about Theresa have really paid off, because apparently there's 500,000 people cheering outside her hospital when they see her. Theresa asks why they're all there. Blair says it took 14 hours to revive you. People like that, the suspense, you know. Which is immediately contradicted when woman holds up a sign that says, "Save us." And this is where the plot sort of starts up and then is immediately sidetracked by the recap we're about to get into. One of the weird things that has happened is the wind has stopped. And I don't just mean like for England, I mean all over the planet. There is no more wind anywhere. And that's dumb. Now, if this were a kid's book or something, I wouldn't go that much into it. It's oh, the wind stopped. Well, I guess that's just a random plot point. But because Norman said that Empress Theresa is not a young adult's book, I get to break down scientifically why this is stupid. Starting with, wind doesn't really exist as its own phenomenon. Wind is caused by differences in atmospheric pressures, so high pressures and low pressures. It is the result of these pressure systems. It's not really an act upon itself, kind of like what rain would be. But Norman treats it as something you can just turn off and on. To do that, though, you would have to stop all the pressure systems all over the planet. And a lot of this is highly theoretical because we can't do that. There's only so much time I'm actually going to dedicate to reading scientific journals to understand the problems of a really stupid book. Short version is, if you were to stop all the pressure systems on the planet, so no more wind anywhere, the first thing that would happen is temperature changes. Without any pressure systems to help shift wind or weather patterns between high and low pressure systems, the hot areas, like areas around the equator, deserts, would get much hotter. Cold areas, like on the poles, would get much colder. The air would stagnate, basically. Norman explains that you wouldn't have any rain anywhere. No wind to move the rain means no crops would grow. That's not entirely true. If you had a farm around a large enough body of water, like a large enough lake, you'd probably be okay. Rain would still happen. Water would still evaporate, would still form clouds, and that would still fall back down and eventually run off into the lake again and rinse and repeat. It would still lead to mass starvation because you're not going to have enough food to feed everybody, but it's not the extinction level event that Norman's treating it as. Keep in mind, of course, that assumes that no one marshals resources to create, really good sprinkler systems. The only thing that really occurs planning-wise in the event of an emergency is marshaling resources, and even then, we're talking like total planetary extinction 5 years down the line. Not to mention filtration systems for salt water. But no, that would take too long to actually think about, so Norman just goes with, everyone's gonna die. And the reason everyone is looking to Theresa for this is because they think that she turned off the wind. This is based on no observable evidence. It was just, hey, she happened to be falling as the wind stopped, so maybe there's a connection. I mean, aside from the millions of other things that were happening around the planet when the wind stopped. But no, this one otherwise unrelated element must be why there's no more wind. Now, it is what happened. Hal turned off the wind as a result of all the wind rushing by Theresa as she was falling, even though that's not actually a result of a pressure system, that is wind resistance, which is different. But oh well, it both include wind, so you might as well. My father is the smartest man I know, and I'm not saying that because he raised me and because he watches my videos. Hi, Dad. My father's a physicist, so as a bit of fun, I decided to bounce some of the book's scientific illiteracy off of him to see how he reacted. The constant looks of astonishment were hilarious. Because if you think that is as dumb as it gets, oh, you've got a lot to look forward to. The book follows an interesting pattern. Theresa causes a problem with her powers, accepts no responsibility for that problem, and then comes up with a different solution with her powers, which makes things significantly worse, but no one ever blames her for it because it's like some unforeseeable consequence. And trust me, that gets really stupid. So Theresa agrees to go on TV, where she will be interviewed to help reveal what's going on and to help assure the planet that she's going to find a solution to everything. She is given an assistant named Nancy, who I don't believe exists outside of these 2 chapters. So she's gone by chapter 7. But rapidly finding a solution to a worldwide cataclysm, which is already leading to panic throughout the planet, has to be put on hold so they can go shopping! I selected 4 skirt and jacket outfits, lots of casual clothes, accessories, underwear, and every kind of personal item. I broke a world speed record in doing all of this in 110 minutes. I don't know what's worse, the fact that Norman thinks a 2-hour shopping spree is fast, or the fact that his pacing is bumpier than the moon's surface after a steady stream of carpet bombings. Anyway, Theresa selects a flattering Irish green dress in honor of her ancestors. And Theresa agrees to sit down with Prime Minister Blair for this once-in-a-lifetime interview. But before that happens, the phone rings. The phone rang. With 1 million people waiting to talk to me, there could be only one person who got through. That has to be my husband, I said to Nancy. Tell him we can't talk on the phone. People are listening. Tell him no matter what I say tonight, I can change my mind tomorrow. First off, why did it have to be her husband? It could have been any number of people. It could have been her family. It could have been her parents. It could have been that sister who probably doesn't exist in the book anymore. It could have been the President of the United States. Second off, why did the phone ring if the book is not going to do anything with it? Why does it introduce this element if it's just going to be written out immediately? This happens so many times in this book where random elements are introduced and immediately dropped. You could actually make a drinking game out of this. I'm not kidding. Just don't play the extreme version of the drinking game, because that's when you take a shot every time you want to kill yourself for reading this book. You'll be dead by page 3. Oh, wait, actually, my mistake. Before they go on to the interview, Theresa gets the mother of all exposition dumps. This is where the recap starts. So, this is the most awkwardly shoehorned in exposition dump I have ever read. Despite the fact that we know well enough what happened when Theresa was abducted and thrown onto the jet and nearly blown up with an atom bomb. We read all that in chapter 4. Norman thought it was important enough to get the other side of that story. But the other side of that story pretty much comes down to, yeah, we thought we should do this, so we did it. And then that goes on for like 20 pages. You'll have to forgive me if I start jumping around between notes kind of erratically here. This part of the book is where I kept getting tripped up with the other times I have recorded this review. I am just going to breeze through it as quickly as possible, giving a few lines, pointing out a few extremely stupid points, and not going into too much detail, because I don't think I need to. I just want to get through this so I can get on with my life. So, when Theresa was kidnapped on June 12th and put in a helicopter, there were multiple witnesses who saw what had happened. The government agents, no, we still don't know what agency they're with, that abducted Theresa in the middle of the day, in the middle of the road, while she was shopping, did not have the foresight to do this away from the populace. Maybe, I don't know, abduct her from her home, where there would be fewer witnesses, in the middle of the night. Yeah, we're talking KGB tactics at that point, but it would result in fewer witnesses. This was the most open kidnapping of history. The FBI gets called in because it's a kidnapping, and they go through Theresa's files. One of the files is labeled Mission Impossible. It was 260 pages of mathematical jargon, completely incomprehensible to anyone but a mathematician. 4 math professors were called in to examine the file. They could not understand what it was for. Mrs. Hartley used many abbreviations and terms without definitions. If she were intending to hide her work's purpose, she did very well. Theresa's a good girl. Theresa's a smart girl. So there's this file of extremely long, incomprehensible bullshit that they somehow deduce is mathematically based. We don't actually see what any of it is. It's just, we're told it's jargon. And that's it. I couldn't tell you a single formula or code that was in it. It's not listed. 4 math professors could not decipher any of it. Theresa is 18, and she made a mathematical code that 4 otherwise extremely smart academic people could not break. Either Theresa's a genius or the entire thing that she wrote was meaningless waste. So where do you think Norma's trying to go with this? Either Theresa's got some weird pseudo-schizophrenic jargon that she's writing in her spare time, or she's a genius. So because they can't get into the files and they can't understand the Mission Impossible file, they just drop that for now. It does come back later, but hold off on that. And I am saying this now only for the sake of the timeline. So the president, for some reason, decides to come clean about the atomic bombing over the Atlantic. Rather than relying on the time-honored tradition of all politicians, lying, he decided to come out and tell everyone the truth, revealing information so highly classified that if he actually did reveal it, Congress would vote to have him impounded. No, not impeached, impounded. Locked up in a black site or something. In an attempt to calm world fears, I will immediately and fully disclose the reasons for this operation. We were testing a new type of bomb. It's called the Moab. Good night, everybody! That's all you really had to do, but no! 15 years ago, an alien entity entered Earth. It disappeared and could not be found for 7 years. 8 years ago, it associated itself with an American named Theresa Sullivan. Okay, so now, the fox has been around since Theresa was 3. She's 18 now. 15 years ago, she was 3. We good? Okay. That's fucking stupid. The fox saw Theresa's mom before Theresa was born. 6 months before she was born. Remember this. It will come up. We could not wait while this alien was as likely to be involved in hostile activities as friendly. It made no announcement to us in 15 years, which we considered an unfriendly relationship. Therefore, we destroyed it with an atomic bomb. Oh my god, what the fuck is logic? Oh my god, I hate to be the guy who snubs the president at a party. Mr. Bob Smith did not shake the president's hand at the ceremony the other day, so we had him escorted to a torture facility for suspicion of being a Russian asset. So, what if the alien was a scout and it was just here to see if Earth is worth involving itself with or opening up to trade deals? Maybe it's like the Vulcans from Star Trek. There was never any evidence to assume that Hal was hostile, so to openly attack him like this is to open yourself up to a counterattack from his species. If one existed, as far as you know. Preemptive attacks only work when you know for a fact that you're fighting a hostile force. Otherwise, you risk attacking innocent people. And the president suggests that Theresa's sacrifice, by her willingness to die in this incredibly stupid way, was a credit to the human spirit. There is no medal designed for courageous conduct in this kind of situation, but let me console her family by saying her dignified and brave sacrifice did more good for the world than any Medal of Honor winner. We offer thanks from a grateful nation. That is so disrespectful to people who have actually died and earned the Medal of Honor. Okay, this is why I'm having trouble with this section. I forgot to mention, this whole section is being given by a BBC anchorman. No name given, of course, but all of this classified information that's being dumped, because there are congressional inquiries, closed-door meetings, one-on-one meetings between the president and this Admiral Ruck, who oversaw Theresa's execution. All of this has been revealed to the BBC. My question is, how the hell did they get this? Another info dump from Julian Assange? The most difficult kind of tailing is following somebody around a college campus. Yes, because operating a surveillance team in a hostile country with minimal supplies and no easy exfil plan is so much easier than some weirdo wandering around a college campus. That never happens. Norman uses the director of the CIA to point out that if you spread out horizontally, you'll survive falling in water. I think it's worth pointing out that I actually did the math on Theresa's terminal velocity when she actually did hit the water. I had to make some numbers up, but it looked like she was falling at about 86 miles an hour. The surface tension for water is actually pretty strict, so that's like crashing through a brick wall at 86 miles an hour. Yeah, so she's dead. It's revealed that the videotape of Theresa, the naval officer who recorded her last words, apparently the recording got tossed overboard, so why was that a thing? Norman introduced something and then dropped it because it was irrelevant. Take a shot! And then Steve is brought in to talk to Congress, and the entire section pretty much comes down to, I didn't know anything. Now then, sir, can you tell us what your wife said about the alien? She said nothing about it. A groan of surprise and disappointment arose from the crowd. Nothing? She never told you anything? Nothing. Not a word. Did she give hints that you didn't understand at the time? No. Did she talk about the possibility of aliens? No. Are you saying that you knew and suspected nothing? That's what I'm saying. Now, this entire section makes you think that Steve being here doesn't really do anything for the plot. It doesn't really build anything. It kind of confirms that he didn't know anything, which establishes the connection that he and Theresa had, the fact that she was so secretive about how her husband didn't know about it, and that would be fine. But that's not why Steve was brought in on this section. He was brought in, for lack of a better word, to suck Theresa's dick. Well, sir, we are very surprised. Is there anything you want to say? Yes. Theresa hasn't been dead 48 hours, and I have 8 messages from Hollywood offering to make a movie about her. There won't be any movie. People like to see somebody get in trouble. I have bad news for you. Theresa never got in trouble. She was perfect in every way. Live with it. That's a remarkable assessment. Theresa was a remarkable person. She became an adult before she became a woman. Other girls worried about diets and hairstyles. She worried about being the mediator between the alien and the world. That's what her Major and Mission Impossible file were about. But you just said you knew nothing about the alien! What the fuck? This is barely off the same page, by the way. He goes on half a page, I knew nothing about this, and then, oh, Theresa wanted to be a mediator between the aliens and Earth. Which is it? These are contradictory! Basic level of editing would have caught this! I can accept that he knows what the Mission Impossible file was about. She could have told him about that off screen. It doesn't help the scene at all, but okay. And then he goes and he does it again. The file, the video that Admiral Rook threw in the ocean was apparently broadcast on the BBC! That young female officer who made a video of my last words was 26-year-old Lieutenant Junior Grade Virginia Connor, who was sure to be remembered. The BBC showed her video. Was the file destroyed or not? And it's not like he started on one section of the chapter and then just forgot about it later. File destroyed, page 90. Showed the video, page 92. Then Father Donati comes in and he does pretty much the same thing that Steve did and just talk about how good a girl Theresa was. Everybody will tell you she was a good girl, a brilliant girl, the pride and joy of her family. If this alien's arrival was an inevitable event of the natural world, God saw to it that it associated itself with an exceptional girl. This kind of erases the idea of free will. Does God control the aliens? He probably meant that things were just aligned the right way so that Theresa would wind up with Hal, but that's kind of open to interpretation. See, this is why beta readers are important, because they can catch things like that and say, by the way, you might want to tighten this up. Father Donati then spends the next 3 pages, talking about how awesome Theresa is and how she's all part of God's plan. And I bring this up only because it's kind of a bizarre running theme that Norman goes for. Apparently the water that... Okay, so Theresa landed in the ocean. It did not kill her because space magic. And the water stopped rolling. Like the waves just calmed down. It wasn't the naval captain from the carrier that spotted this. It was... the captain from a small freighter carrying grain from Argentina to Africa, who spotted how motionless the water was, and so word got out quickly. Commercial airplanes passing over the area were asked to note the location and extent of the calm seas. That in and of itself is not a tremendous mistake. I guess you can do it if it's a really unusual situation like that, but Norman relies on commercial airlines, and you'll see this a lot later on, but he relies on commercial airlines for all sorts of weird intel that they're not actually designed to do. And this was the most acceptable use of them. But anyway, this whole thing eventually resulted in the president, President Martin, suddenly resigned in the middle of the night and left the White House to go to his Indiana home. And then his vice president, Veronica Stinson, was sworn in like someone in the middle of the night, I suppose. I actually have someone who's been following me on Twitter who has been correcting and adding a lot of changes to the text of Empress Theresa, and came up with what I think would have been a much better idea. So chapter 5 should not have ended the way that it did, with President Martin just retiring in the middle of the night. Instead, the text should have been, the next part of the BBC program was a real shock. That Friday night, President Martin committed suicide. Now, Norman is going for a family-friendly, no-violence kind of a story, so I understand why he didn't go that route. But how much more interesting would it be if President Martin actually committed suicide as a result of this? Think of the intrigue, think of the drama that suddenly reveals. He was so ashamed, and this whole scandal was so damaging that he actually killed himself. I mean, it cuts down on a lot of text, but this is a good situation of less is more. So thank you to Cephella for pointing that out. I thought that was cool. And yes, I believe I pronounced that correctly. Haha, go me. Instead, chapter 5 ends with this. Did I have any responsibility for this mess, for not telling people about Hal when I was 10? You decide. If you're ever going to try to bring the audience with a fourth wall break in like that, it helps if your writing is interesting in the first place.
God, I miss cocaine.
Her. Fourth wall break inside a fourth wall break. That's like 16 walls.
Like, this is not some intriguing what-if scenario. This isn't some sort of a divulging question of morals or wrongdoing or something like that. Theresa was following the advice of morons. And considering how little character we've actually seen out of her thus far, how little she has actually done in the world, I don't think it would have made a difference. Or at least not in the way that she is aiming for. It would have been more interesting. But Theresa is so low-key as a character. She is so bland and blasé and does not have anything interesting about her. Anyway, chapter 5 is done. Chapter 6 does not start off well. I was getting depressed. This BBC program had been giving me nothing but bad news. You had your husband and your pastor come on to a congressional inquiry and go on and on about how awesome you were. How is that bad news? And most of it was a benign recap. But oh no, the recap's not done. We're still watching the BBC program. Oh my god, I hate life. Some ship comes by to rescue Theresa. There's a bunch of sharks getting churned up in the ocean. There were so many sharks that the sailors had to expend thousands of rounds in order to get near Theresa. Oh, and just so I can have this down as proof, the sailors finally reached Theresa, hauled her onto the ship, and Theresa was unconscious. Her head and shoulders were above water. Blah, 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 I'm bored. 2 electrocardio leads were placed on her to see if there was any cardiac activity at all. There was no activity, no sign of life. The doctor pronounced her dead. Does this mean that she died on deck? Was she dead the entire time? Was she simply assumed to be unconscious? You've got to be clear with your words. Again, beta readers are important. Or editors if you want to go that route. I prefer both. And this is what affects the timeline so badly. The 2 weeks that Theresa was dead, was that after they found her when she was declared dead on the ship? Or was she floating in the ocean for 2 weeks? It's not clear. The book states that there were a lot of ships looking for her for some period of time, but the only period of time we get in this is the last 2 days. So we don't get a clear idea of how long she was actually floating there, or how long it took to get her back to England. What we do know is that the world mourned her loss. When I heard you were dead, the tears leaked from my eyes. So much hope crushed. As a staff member said, it was a heroic effort, Prime Minister. Her family will be grateful. I said, thank you. We are all lost, ladies and gentlemen. Without you, there was no possibility of communicating with the alien. So, he's not sad that a young woman died in this incredibly botched assassination attempt. He's sad because now we can't trade secrets with aliens. Prime Minister Blair wanted to meet a Vulcan. In my headcanon, Prime Minister Blair is a Trekkie. Which doesn't exactly work because if Theresa's gonna be anything, she's gonna be a Jedi. Like, not a good one, but, you know, an incompetent one with too much power. Well, apparently the announcement of Theresa's death was so devastating that they gave Theresa a national level procession when they took her corpse from the ship and carried it to the hospital. The world settled in for the long wait for the HMS Queen Elizabeth to return to England. Somber music was played on radio day and night. A favorite selection was Saint-Saëns' The Swan for cello and piano, made famous by Russian ballet as The Dying Swan. But the most appropriate piece for the girl, descended from the Irish, was a soulful instrument version of Danny Boy. It was perfect. Great Britain was proud to bring one of its own back home for a final visit. She was American, you twit! This is the kind of attention you give someone of the royal family at one of their funerals, not some random nobody that the public by and large does not know or understand. Sure, Theresa's this poor innocent who eventually was revealed had some secret connection with aliens. That's cool. And I bet you get a bunch of sci-fi nerds to mourn her. I don't see the radio changing its programming entirely for a day and night schedule for some random nobody. Theresa hasn't done anything. She hasn't earned this. Norman is just using the crowd to tell the reader, okay, be sad now. The crowd in this book is routinely used to tell the reader how they're supposed to feel. They are no different from an applause sign on a sitcom TV set. And then there's the matter of how they revived Theresa. Put her in a patient room. The room was heated to 105 degrees. The theory was that if your body temperature returned to normal, your heart would automatically start beating. Much argument ensued among the doctors about what resuscitation procedures to use. It was decided to use none, except as a desperate last resort. They didn't know what Hal was doing. Any interference on their part might be harmful. The doctor in charge explained, "We're not even going to take a blood sample."
Anyway, that's how I lost my medical license.
So, Theresa, her body has not begun to rot. So, because she was in absolutely perfect condition, the doctors decided that something's going on. They don't even run basic tests. The only thing they do is they grab a ophthalmoscope and they check the blood vessels in her eye, and there was apparently no breakdown. And that was enough for them to conclude, let's just turn on the heat in the room and see if that revives her. The ranking doctor protested. "I don't care how advanced these beings are. No technology can keep her alive this way." Blair, waited a moment to give the doctor's comment due respect. Then I said, "Why not? Every atom needs to be kept in its proper place. Her body uses all the space available. There's no way to get to the atoms."
What in God's holy name are you blathering about?
I don't know what the fuck that means. But no! The secret to reviving a dead body is put them in a warm room. But Blair and the head doctor decide it's better to go through with this because... Will she be the same Theresa? That, sir, is unpredictable. It would be sad to see her a vegetable. Yes. Would you do me a favor? Ask people to pray for her. God can't ignore 100 million people. He can't. We shall be insistent. What I really appreciate is just how well Norman carries through in setting up this tense what-if question and then following through immediately after with an answer, giving us no time for suspense to hold on. All attention was now on the electroencephalograph monitor. If your brain didn't work, there was no artificial way to resuscitate it. It was all up to you. And there it was! 2 of the 12 monitor lines were wiggling! Soon all lines were wiggling! Wiggle, 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 yeah! But sidestepping the fact that this is, by all accounts, a medical miracle, reviving a dead girl by turning the heater on a little, Blair apparently sees this as a great personal victory, even though he did nothing. "I left you for a few minutes and went to another room. Colleagues congratulated me. I was greatly excited. This was the Olympic gold medal of politics, the possible saving of the nation. Nothing could equal this." So Blair really is a great politician. Somebody else did all the work while Blair was around, and Blair gets all the credit. The doctor doesn't even have a name. I also have to include these lines because they're so special. Because they show how conceited and self-absorbed Theresa is, and because the writing is so bad. Theresa spends a good-sized paragraph thinking about how Blair said Theresa was the right person to bond with Hal. "I told Nancy, he's not talking about the wind, he's talking about what I'll do later. He knows I won't mess up the world like a world dictator." "I see," said the suddenly aware Nancy. "It's an amazing concept. It's really not. Your prime minister knew it 1 minute after I woke up. He's a smart man."
My brain hurts!
And I made a point of a very similar line to how the prose and the dialogue unnecessarily repeat each other. This is a good example of that. "How could a 40-something Englishman connect with an 18-year-old American girl? It was like I was the alien from space. I thought this was funny, and repeated it to Nancy. Poor Blair. Dealing with me must be like dealing with a space alien. She laughed." This is so painfully redundant. But the recap finally ends, and we can get on with the plot as stupid as that is. And Theresa leaves to go talk to Blair in the new most important interview of all time. All of humanity had been sweating blood all day waiting to hear what I had to say. The earth stood still. Baseball games in America had been postponed. Highways were deserted. Plane flights were canceled for lack of passengers. Every person who could by any means stay home watching television did. This was a critical meeting. If nothing came out of it, we all are lost. I can't read this straight. It's too unnatural. And that is Chapter 6, Chapter 7, The World's Dumbest Interview. I'd just like to point out, too, there's no reason to really separate Chapters 5 and 6, aside from, like, sheer length of the chapters. I've only gone through about 40 pages, so breaking up 2 chapters in about 20 pages apiece, thereabouts, not unreasonable. It really helps if there's a reason to break the chapters up. Like, think of a scene break, a moment to pause so that you can catch your breath, for lack of a better word. These reviews are going to take far longer to get through than I thought. But I did it. I am through Chapter 6, and that is where I kept stumbling. Oh boy, I am excited. This is a personal achievement. Somebody throw a parade for me, and then change the programming on some radio station for the occasion. Oh, I forgot this line. Admiral Ruck comes back, and he says, I did not know about Theresa Hartley's connection with Hal until 1.5 hours later when the president spoke on television. Then why did you agree to kill her with a nuke? I mean, did you just get the orders and think, wow, the president's really coming up with wacky ways to execute criminals? I swear I don't mean for this review to be as long as it is, but there's so much wrong to show everyone. It's incredible. Eventually we're going to get to like part 20 of the review, and I'm going to be talking about how Theresa's using her toothbrush wrong. So this chapter is the one where Theresa puts on this interview with Blair. Not like an actual professional interviewer, someone who actually is trained for this kind of thing, because it takes a significantly different skill set from being a prime minister. Blair indicated my seat with his hand, and we both sat down. He waited a few seconds to let me settle my stuff in. I spoke first. We made it to the big leagues. Think they're watching in China? Most likely. I am told 4 billion people are watching this. 4 billion people in more than 100 countries, and who knows how many languages, are watching this. Now, considering how frighteningly prevalent worldwide poverty is, I call bullshit on that. Now, this next part I've just got to point out because it goes to Norman's character as an author. I will jump around a little bit, so bear with me. I'm not taking these out of context. This is pretty much as it is. Rather than read the entire page, I'm just going to take sections from 3 main chunks. The whole world was watching. My hair had dried and flared out in that magnificent mane that oohed and awed everyone. My green outfit was modest, only 5 inches above the knees, and with not much cleavage, but didn't hide my well-turned figure. All right, my chest and butt were well outlined. There, I said it, so call the police. Jumping down, I glanced at a TV screen. It showed my magnificence in full-length profile. The technicians started grinning, and jumping down again, I couldn't help myself. I had to say it. You should see the little black nothing dress I had on the first time Steve entered my dorm room. The technicians and government men all laughed. Who could blame me for taking a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to flaunt it to the world? Theresa, the good Catholic girl, is showing off her body to a worldwide audience. Family-friendly goodness! You know, for a book that's supposed to be devoid of sex and sexual situations, Norman really does a lot to make sure you understand how attractive Theresa is.
Yeah, everyone needs to know that when I work these lumps, no man is immune to their influence.
Again, he's probably typing with one hand. So the interview is a chance for the world to understand Theresa and Hal. And Blair opens with this. I would like to talk about Hal. The first question is of what is he made? Not matter? A lot of what you're about to encounter is speculation and supposition. We have at no point in this book done anything to analyze Hal, or study Hal, or talk to Hal, or reach out to Hal. Hal has had barely any impact anywhere in the story, And despite this, Theresa knows everything about him. To such an extent that I have to question how she wasn't scouted by Mensa at some point in her life. Theresa concludes, somehow, that Hal must be made out of dark matter. Every time Theresa does something overly exactly or overly smart, things that she really shouldn't know because it hasn't been brought up, she's shown no real steady intellect, anything. Like we've never seen her do anything that requires more than an average level intellect. Her character was not set up to reflect any kind of incredible intelligence. She certainly could be smart. There's no problem with her being a genius at 18. The problem is that this is the first time, I'm on page 116, this is the first time she's doing anything more complicated than driving a car. This is the woman whose escape plan from a 50,000 foot fall getting away from an atomic bomb involved Coke bottles. And yet, she talks like this. Can anything be made of this dark matter? Why not? Think of a dark matter universe with dark matter people. They can't see our universe. They can't know matter has 92 elements that organize in a million ways. How could they guess we have planets with millions of kinds of creatures? We find new things in nature all the time. The dark matter world should have lots of surprises for us. What keeps Hal together? His own gravity, and some dark matter particles may have some kind of stickiness. How does Theresa know so much about dark matter and astrophysics? She's never expressed any interest in these subjects, and this is the first time in the book that any of it has been mentioned. While I can believe Theresa would gravitate towards extraterrestrial subject matter to study because of Hal, none of this has been established and doesn't fit within a proper story format. It feels like Norman just decided it would be cool to have, so he slipped it in, even if it doesn't fit organically. So, they go back and forth over a couple of questions. Hal seems to just protect Theresa. He gives an unnatural accuracy in throwing things. It's just useful. Theresa's hair is thicker because it looks good. And how does stopping the wind help you? It doesn't. I've been thinking about that. Hal is beginning to sound pretty dumb. Ah, we have Hal the stupid, the desperately hoped for progress. I don't think you get to call someone else stupid when you follow it up with a sentence like that. Blair stopped. To each of his points, I had given a perfectly legitimate counterpoint. Theresa does not have a shred of evidence to back up anything that she says. Oh God, this part. Okay. See, normally when you provide additional context to someone's background or a situation, even if it's not a great explanation, you still do something to fill out the universe, fill out a character. Even if it's not very satisfying, it still at least makes some logical sense. Now, my question for a long while was, why did Hal bond with Theresa? Why did he pick Theresa? Was it just a coincidence? Was it divine intervention? It turns out neither of those. There is a reason. It is far dumber than anything you are prepared for. Also, this is a timeline note. So you remember how Hal was on Earth 18 years ago and was discovered landing on Earth 15 years ago? You see, it makes less sense when you put it in proper context. Well, Theresa gives us this line. Blair reveals the story with the fox. Apparently, Theresa's father told Blair this story. I don't know why. There's no real context for it. It just seems to be kind of a weird, hey, 6 months before my daughter was born, my wife saw a fox. And that was it. That's the story. A fox walked up to her and watched her for a few minutes. This happened 18 and a half years ago. You were expected. The BBC didn't mention that. Your father told the story. Is it important? It could be. What was my mother doing? She was raking leaves in the backyard. Raking leaves? Something Hal probably never saw before. Don't you see? Hal might have been in North America 100 million years, but he never saw anybody raking leaves before. Oh wait! Did you think that was the dumb part? It's not! So they tried to explain why Hal wanted to transfer to Theresa. Apparently, like, he wasn't ready to make the transfer at that exact moment, so, like, he was inside the Fox, and then he fucked off, and then he came back, like, 10 years later. Apparently that's how long it takes to prep the transfer or something. I don't know, it's not explained, we're just going on. But apparently he wanted to transfer to Theresa's mother, even if he wasn't ready. But why Theresa's mother? What made her different? What made her stand out? Why did he want to transfer to your mother? Mom was holding a rake. Hal thought it was an extra appendage. That's what made her different.
What are you?
An idiot sandwich.
Not only do we have a very big contradiction, speculative contradiction, mind you, Theresa offers no evidence for this millions of years claim, but in that entire time, Hal never saw anyone not only raking leaves, but never holding anything. Hal never witnessed a human holding a tool. Think about it, he thought the rake was an extra appendage, just some sort of a weird natural extension to Theresa's mom's arm. So has he never seen anyone hold a shovel, or a sword, or a gun, or pocket change, or a box from Amazon, or groceries? They keep calling Hal brainless and stupid, and I can't argue against it. I have no idea how a creature from a dark matter universe is supposed to exist or function, but okay. But they can't be this stupid. The only reason Hal hasn't, like, starved to death is because he's literally immortal. A Wrinkle in Time plays around a lot with astrophysics and quantum mechanic theory. It does a tremendous job simplifying the whole subject, but it still is able to speak in a very smart manner that I think, at least on an elementary level, can be kind of thought-provoking. Like a world in which everything is two-dimensional. The main plot device of this book doesn't know what a rake is. And then she just keeps going on. Theresa has nothing to back any of this stuff up. None of the stuff that she is talking about is credible or logical or makes any sense. She has no basis for connection with Hal outside of the he is insider connection, but, you know, never talks with him or anything like that. And still, she comes up with bullshit like this. Trees have many appendages. Trees don't do anything. Hal needs something that moves? I wouldn't call it a need. Something made of dark matter couldn't evolve in its own world. We make it evolve. She is talking about the evolutionary processes of a creature made of dark matter, a material that on the previous page she admitted she didn't know that much about. Why don't we have a room full of scientists standing up on chairs and in unison scream bullshit? Blair keeps going and asks, what if that difference of the rake made Hal interested in your mother? And Theresa thought about that, and she thought for a full minute, and then they take a break. She's away for an hour and 15 minutes. International audience, why aren't you more prepared for this? But apparently that time was enough for her to figure out what Hal is about. And then she contradicts her previous idea. I won't even call it a theory as a joke. Hal is not a creature from a dark matter universe. It makes less sense than that. Hal has nothing to do with an alien civilization. He has no more brains than a jellyfish. He's a natural thing left over from the Big Bang. There must be trillions of Hals all over the universe. After spending time on one planet, they reproduce somehow and travel to other stars. The Hals cling to objects made of matter. Think of syrup on pancakes. The Hals are the syrup, and they assume the shape of the pancakes. That's not how syrup works. You ever just pause for a moment in the middle of talking about something and realize, oh my god, I actually have to say the following sentence? Okay, now it's time for the big reveal. How Theresa's powers work. You may be shocked to discover that the powers are extremely internally inconsistent. When you're setting up powers like this, or any kind of a magic system, what you really have to pay attention to are internal consistency and limits. You want to make sure that the powers aren't too powerful, just so that the protagonist is never challenged again. And guess what? Theresa's never challenged in any meaningful way. Superman, for example, is a good go-to example for an otherwise overpowered character, but he routinely goes up against other characters who are either about as strong as he is, or they have powers that he has weaknesses to. For example, Superman is actually weak against magic. So that way he can still be challenged, there can still be some sort of a physical threat that he has to go against, and that's when he's not fighting something that has some sort of an emotional risk for him. At the same time, it's also good to have some variety in your powers, some flexibility. Hal, unfortunately, does not have any internal consistency whatsoever, and the book contradicts itself on the same page. I'm sure this astonishes you. What you have to understand is, Hal doesn't operate like we do. He acts because he taps into momentum of something else. He moves because he's always moving in some way, not because he needs anything. He has no needs. Alright, so on the previous page, Hal is supposed to be some natural thing left over from the Big Bang. But if Hal has no needs, truly, then he has no need to react to any stimulus around him. There is no reason for him to go out of his way to protect the host body that he's in, especially because apparently he can exist in space just fine and can bounce to new host body anytime he wants. That's kind of how the book opened, with Hal jumping host bodies. Despite that, though, Hal has reflexes. This becomes so imprinted in his structure, he will do the reflex ahead of the animal when the stimulus is present. For instance, if the animal is attacked, Hal will do the defense reflexes before the animal does. And Theresa tries to explain the repertoire of different abilities that Hal has presented over the years. There's one more step to take, and we get to the fully evolved Hal. After billions of years of emerging with thousands of kinds of creatures on 100 worlds, Hal's reflex systems become so complicated he will generate new reflexes to help the animal that the animal itself doesn't do. Hair is an example. It's useful. It protects from the cold. It can be a kind of armor. Hal makes my hair grow thick, or keeps it thick by keeping the water in.
Maybe she's born with it.
An alien Jess monster.
So Hal has no needs, but he evolves, and he has defensive reflexes to protect something that he does not need to protect. By this time, I'll bet nobody could follow my reasoning. This book in a nutshell. So despite all of these natural inconsistencies and the absolute dearth of an explanation for why Hal would actually have these abilities, I mean, there's an explanation, but it doesn't make sense. I can only come to the conclusion that Hal is a Deus ex machina in its most natural, purest form. Theresa needs super strength. Deus ex machina. Theresa needs an aimbot. Deus ex machina. Norman likes girls with really thick hair. I mean, Theresa needs really thick hair. Deus ex machina. The way that Hal's powers develop basically come down to Theresa needs a thing, so she does a little bit of work, and eventually Hal figures out what she wants. Now there's this board thing that Theresa's going to create later on, and that pretty much just becomes the control board for Hal. Anytime she needs something, she moves a few pieces around. Doesn't really explain it better than that, but Hal starts doing something new, and it helps Theresa or the plot or whatever. My question then comes down to, how did Hal, if he was going around, let's just buy the notion that he was going around and developing these reflexes naturally to help creatures and animals on different planets. How the hell did he pick up the power to completely disintegrate the pressure system over an entire planet? At what point is that going to become a defensive need for anything? I mean, maybe you've got an apple tree on some distant planet that didn't want its seedlings to go too far away, so just cancel all the wind so they won't get picked up and sent away somewhere. And all I gotta worry about at that point is alien Johnny Appleseed stealing them. Ironically, alien Johnny Appleseed would be a much more interesting story than this. And a note I have on the wind thing. About the wind. Birds, bats, and who knows what else on other planets make their living by... make their living, wow. Make their living by flying around. The air has to be calm. A high wind can knock the creature to the ground. When I fell out of the plane, Hal stopped the wind so that I could go back to flying. Theresa's attributing an act of God to a biological function. She just spent 8 pages breaking Hal down as a symbiotic biological construct who somehow evolved the ability to halt meteorological events across an entire planet. While I'm willing to accept that he has that power, the logic that Theresa is using to explain this doesn't work. And it's not that he can't be a biological creature who just has that ability. Superman's powers come from the radiation from our sun. You know, it's not that he was born with it. On Krypton, he would have been a perfectly normal kid. But on Earth, he's superpowered, because weird alien biology. Okay, I'll buy it. It just doesn't work here because Hal has no needs, as Theresa has explained, so there's no reason for him to adapt the way that he is. The bad news is Hal is brainless. I can't communicate with him. The good news is he has no resistance to change. It might be possible to control Hal by manipulating his reflexes. It would be very difficult. If you can do that, what could you do? I don't know. There may be no limit to what I can do. And the inconsistencies climb again on the next page. Hal doesn't want anything. He didn't choose. Theresa explained that Hal chose Theresa's mother as a new host because of the rake arm thing. Which is it, Norman? Meanwhile, in the first of many examples, the media is going after Theresa because she didn't explain herself very well, and there are still a lot of unanswered questions, and Theresa's acting like that's shocking. It's their fault if they don't get it, I said to Nancy. Everything has been explained. Nothing is understood. This book in a nutshell. How many times can I use that joke? Theresa claims that she explained everything. Everything was explained, but poorly, and none of it made sense. Yes, the media is twisting her words, but it's not like she did a good job laying anything out. Theresa just changes the channel to a news source she does not enjoy. I changed to the biggest international media circus of all, CNN. Like, I am hardly about to defend CNN, but that is funny. I don't know Norman's backstory. I don't know why he doesn't like the media, but multiple times throughout the book, he goes out of his way to attack the media or mock them or make them look bad. And of course, after this world-shattering revelation that Hal is a thing, a lot of media outlets are talking about Theresa, and she doesn't really like it. For example, there's this discussion of how Theresa should use her powers, and this is one of the bigger fuck-ups, I will argue. So the big question at this point in the plot is, if you can call it a plot, is should there be a committee assisting Theresa? I, for one, am in favor of it because recreating the wind is a very complicated issue that would take a lot of scientific experts working together for a common goal, and Theresa's kind of an idiot. Theresa, however, does not agree, and apparently neither does the President of France. It is not practical. We are not talking of the United Nations where thousands of people are needed to do something. Hal can do something alone. This is power on a new level. A committee in control of Hal would be a target for every terrorist organization. I believe And suddenly all of France unsubscribes from my channel. I believe nobody will want to be on the committee. We would need to surround each member with an army. Yeah, that's not how that works. While terrorists are in fact a... Hello, you. Oh, you're coming to comfort me because I'm reading a terrible book. How cute. Hi. Food later. The problem with this terrorist idea, and this is one that actually follows through later in the book, is the idea is to counter any kind of terrorist activity, you need a literal army surrounding singular targets. Then how can Madame Hartley control Hal alone? She will need to be hidden where 1,000 assassins can't find her. Okay, God. It's getting to that part where it's complicated in how much it's contradicting itself. Like, this book contradicts itself so often that you could make a separate drinking game on it, and you will still die. They keep talking about terrorists and assassins, and like I mentioned in part 1, there's like one assassin, and his attack gets shrugged off by a page later. There's so much buildup, and no goddamn payoff. I hate this book. It's rough in the big leagues. I didn't do anything, and people want me dead. It's wrong. Why do people do the wrong thing? We have seen no evidence of any actual targeted interest by assassins or government bodies or terrorist groups or weird, evil Bond villains. This is the first time it is suggested that someone might actually want Theresa dead. And because none of these potential threats have been demonstrated in any capacity, there are no stakes. There's no reason for the reader to be involved or concerned about them. I mean, at this point, the terrorists and the assassins that the book goes on and on harping about have the same narrative consequences as getting hit by a bus when you're crossing the street. Yeah, it's possible. You could die like that at any time, but you don't really worry about the bus. Got a kitty resting on my kitty resting shirt. I am popular today. Also, there's a little point. I'm going to bring this up now because I'm probably going to forget it later, but the point about Theresa needing to be in hiding to, be where 1,000 assassins can't find her. First off, good luck hiding yourself. What are you? Stop it. Cat. I need to reinforce these armrests. First off, good luck actually hiding yourself away in a place that assassins can't actually find you while maintaining constant communication with the Prime Minister of Britain and the President of the United States. Second, this is stupid because the general public knows where she ends up hiding, and it's not like your standard CIA safe house where it's in the middle of goddamn nowhere, somewhere completely out of the way and nondescript. No, she goes to live at some British noble dude's house. People drive by to see her at one point, like en masse. Oh, and speaking of assassins, I think Norman owes Suzanne Collins an apology. I feel like that girl in The Hunger Games, except she only had 23 assassins to worry about. What are my chances? Those weren't assassins, you dingbat. And then they just kind of stopped the interview so they could talk about the wedding between Prince William and Kate Middleton. It's... stay on topic! And then Theresa calls herself Bond, Jane Bond, and the Prime Minister on international TV starts singing the James Bond theme. And Norman types that out for us. And with that, Theresa leaves to go save the world. Chapter 8. So this chapter actually starts on something of a high note because page 133 is one of only 2 pages in this entire book that I did not feel had anything stupid enough to leave a tab on. These are all on the other pages, so page 133, one of the only not terrible pages. It certainly makes up for it on the next page, though. So even though she is apparently directly responsible for stopping the wind and dooming the planet, Theresa is bizarrely popular. The whole world had stopped what it was doing to avoid creating news that might interrupt my story. People on the street were questioned for their opinions of me. They were universally supportive. And that is despite the media asking questions of, well, we really don't know what's going on, or why she's doing this, or why she was chosen by Hal. How can she have universal support from the populace at large and still be the target of hit pieces from the media? But that doesn't matter. The populace loves Theresa. The world at large loves Theresa, even though she hasn't done anything and has doomed them all. She's just such a good girl that no one can really resist loving her. The crazy terrorists would come after me, but no politician who depended on public support would ever take me on. It would be political suicide. The people would storm his government building and throw him in the street. Apparently Theresa's so popular that she would inspire coups. And I suppose some of that support is thanks to the newly sworn-in President of the United States, Veronica Stinson. When we face invincible threats to our lives and well-being, we feel a loss of influence to what happens to us. We're helpless and impotent. In desperation, we support a hero who promises to save us. For some, it was Napoleon. For others, Lenin, Hitler, or Senator McCarthy. Again, don't bring up bad people to compare yourself to. I'm genuinely concerned why Norman keeps bringing up Hitler as a comparison for Theresa. Sure, some people saw Hitler as a hero. He's kind of the go-to example for evil dictator, though. I'd also like to point out, I forgot to mention, because there's so much to go over, that early on when Theresa first talked with Father Donati, she promised not to create a cult, and now she has a following that would willingly overthrow government officials if they so much as said something bad about her. Theresa has a cult. I won't try to set up a religious movement if that's what you mean.
Bullshit.
So in another big news piece, Steve has arrived at Logan Airport for a flight to London, and Theresa hadn't told him about Hal, so she's worried what he would think of her. So during the Cold War, we had this thing called the Doomsday Clock. I guess it's still technically a thing, but it was kind of a weird visual estimate for how close we were to nuclear Armageddon. And now someone has converted the Doomsday Clock to count down when mass starvations would really happen, when the food ran out. Somebody had estimated a reasonable number of 800 million tons of food and started counting from there. The number was dropping 40 tons a second. We had 228 days to go. Thanks for reminding me. And get used to that. Norman is very exact with certain numbers. It's distracting, honestly. So Blair picks up Theresa in a limo and drives her out to a friend of his, a man named Edmund Parker. And that is where Theresa will be staying as part of her low-key hidey hole away from the eyes of those thousands of assassins. And Theresa wastes no time complaining to him about the media. I was watching television this morning. The dummies are saying all kinds of stupid things. And of course Blair is instantly in her corner and doesn't say, well, they're just trying to ask questions to get at the truth, or anything like that. He instead says, I heard all that. It is disgraceful. It's more than disgraceful, it's stupid. They wasted no time. We only talked a few hours ago. I will never talk to reporters. I can't waste time on idiots. A few hours ago, she was talking to a few people in a room that bought all of the sophomoric bullshit she was slinging at them about Hal, despite not having a single shred of proof for any of it. I'm pretty sure she'll talk to idiots as long as they're friendly to her. They all tell lies to build up viewership. They will be exposed as liars. This is building sandcastles as the tide comes in. They talk somewhat about morality and philosophy, and then they try to talk about science, and they go back to the interview where Theresa claims that she explained everything about Hal. Remember how she said that she explained everything and they understood nothing? Well, take a shot! You did say something about Hal needing matter to hold his order together last night. I didn't know what you meant. I didn't think it was the time to go into it deeply last night. who would understand it? So did you explain everything or not? And apparently it wasn't even understood. Both points are contradicted. I'm actually gonna have to come up with the Empress Theresa drinking game, which you should only play with water. Alcohol will kill you. Blair talks about classic literature, Shakespeare mostly, and apparently the Caine Mutiny is required reading for all leaders. I did not know that. Interesting. Theresa starts thinking about how she and Steve are meant for each other and how neither of them were on the inside crowd in high school. And she starts talking about Steve's high school dating life and her high school dating life. It goes nowhere. It is a strict out of nowhere tangent for the book. It's so meaningless. There's this massive wall of text, several pages that are just walls of text that have nothing to do with anything. Teresa's just like lost in her thoughts or something. Still talking about her past and her thoughts of Steve. None of this goes anywhere. And I'm just gonna say this line so that it's out there in the public sphere. I worried about what Hal would mean in my future. As a result, girls talked about me being of indeterminate gender orientation. Okay, so something finally happens. Theresa gets knocked out of her goddamn thoughts. Blair and Theresa finally arrive to the Parker estate. Apparently it was a Tudor-style house. It was 120 feet long and 3 stories high. What's interesting, though, is Norman remembered his reference about the target of terrorists needing an army to protect them, and he's got Theresa covered. To the sides and rear of the house was a forest where thousands of British soldiers were moving in. So, yeah, they're hiding Theresa to a place where assassins won't be able to find her, and surrounding her with thousands of soldiers in an otherwise large, fancy estate that did not have thousands of soldiers in the forest previously. How did I get through this book? Oh, but did you think that was dumb? Because the way that the Parker family is introduced is frankly kind of creepy. My car door was opened by a maid and I got out. A 50-ish butler with a broad, smiling face opened the Prime Minister's door. The chauffeur and 2 maids took care of the luggage. No words were spoken as the butler guided the group through the front door. I thought this was odd. Edmund Parker and his family stood to the side next to the door to one of the living rooms. Peter Blair walked over to them immediately. "This way, madam," said the butler, leading me into the side of the grand staircase. We went into an elevator. I thought not being introduced to the family was odd too. Why didn't I meet the family? "The British respect for privacy, madam. They understand why you're here and won't speak to you unless you speak first." So the British are so polite that even people of high class and status are willing to be subservient to random nobodies who doomed the planet. Now Norman does try to defend that, but immediately trips up. I can't imagine that happening in the States. It doesn't happen either in normal times. Every moment of your time is the world's treasure. Now, we're not going to have time for it this time, but remember that line. Oh, I forgot this section. Apparently, one of Theresa's professors in college got replaced because he, said something that Theresa didn't like about God. There's this very heavy section about a lot of creationist myths that I've seen in the early days of YouTube about how nothing could have preceded God because he could get nothing from something. It kind of hints at irreducible complexity, which is another bad arguing point. I've done no research into Norman as a person to really confirm this, but going by his writing, I'm sticking with the theory that he is a creationist. The first being was not a composite because nothing preceded him and he could get nothing from something else. Nor could anything be taken away from him since he had no parts. Something that is not a composite has to be its own existence, which was that which makes it what it is. What? God's existence is his essence because he has nothing else, and existence, if there is any, can have no beginning or end, therefore he is eternal. So Steve arrives. I'm bouncing all over the place. This is a mess. Steve arrives at the Parker estate and is brought to Theresa, and they go downstairs to meet the rest of the household, and it just continues to be creepy. We went to the foyer. The Edmund Parker family could be seen sitting quietly in a huge living room. They looked like they'd wait there weeks for us. "Who are those people?" Steve asked. "I'm not sure. I think they live here." Way to make the poor, confused hero of the book feel awkward in your house. This is hardly inviting. This is just creepy. The Parker family just sits off to one side in their own home and just stare at Theresa from afar, not saying anything or moving. That's so terrifying, honestly. I mean, if a family can be summed up with, "I don't know who they are, I think they lived here," you done fucked up. Eventually, Steve does introduce himself to the Parkers, and they introduce themselves back, and they start speaking. There's the wife, Helen, the 3 kids, John, Stephanie, and Jennifer. There's another kid who's in the military and is not present in the house at the time. And say goodbye to the kids, because you will not see them for like another 300 pages or something. The kids exist to be introduced. That is their character trait. The Parkers being a childless couple would not change this book in the slightest. We would just be out most of a paragraph. That's it. Just as well, the kids don't get any character, and the Parkers, the parents, get only the most basic level of humanity. You could replace them with robots, and it would be just as effective. Just as well, though, they're living in the most boring house ever. Edmund Parker waved his hand to invite everyone to sit down. We made small talk, followed by a tour of the house. I was dazzled by its opulence. There were more objects in it than can be discussed in a day. It reminded me of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. You couldn't get a good look at everything in less than a week. This house was a palace. I joked, I may never go home. Now, that's a boring description because she describes it's opulent, it's fancy, there's a lot of stuff, but she doesn't even describe what that stuff is. Are they paintings or sculptures or suits of armor? This kind of lazy setup requires the reader to put their own images into the book while the author does nothing to set the scene. When you're setting the scene, you don't want to be so exact that you spend several pages detailing a single room, but you want to give at least a basic impression of simple things. The color of the wall. Maybe there's a series of paintings that can all be described, like a series of beautiful landscape paintings, a rows of certain type of ancient pottery. So enough to give you an idea of what it could look like, but not so exact that you can't use your imagination. There's a fine balance you really got to pay attention to. Too much information, the reader can't use their imagination, and the book becomes less engaging. Too little information, and the reader has to do all the work on their end, and there's no connection to the book. And again, even though Theresa's supposed to be in hiding, the next day, she gets mail. Lots of it. And at least a good portion of it contains money. The euros came to 1,800. There was around 1,000 in American dollars and a few hundred in various other denominations. Skipping down a little bit, "You're getting a lot of money in the mail," Steve said. "Oh yeah? How come?" "They want to thank you for saving their necks." She hasn't done anything yet! She's only been charged with restarting the wind and hasn't done a bloody thing to earn any of this money. People are just shoveling it in her general direction. Eventually, Theresa does get into a routine to save the world. Now, keep in mind, there's no wind anywhere. They're on a very strict timeline to actually get this, get the wind going again and get rain going. That's the key thing. It's not just the wind, it's also the rain so that we can get the crops watered. And time is really of the essence because it's not so much of growing new crops. Crop rotations are actually very important. A really easy thing to do in a lot of movies and books is to show how hard somebody works towards a certain goal. I just watched Big Hero 6 again the other night, and we get this great montage where the main character Hero is applying for this college for a science fair, and he spends all time in his laboratory garage working on this project, and you see all of this animation go by so quickly. He's doing all this work, he's falling asleep at his desk, and that's a good way to show how serious he was about this goal. No dialogue needed to be said. He really wanted to go to that college, and his non-stop work ethic, day and night, showed that very clearly. Here is Theresa's work ethic when it comes to saving the planet from starvation. As the week went on, we settled into a routine. 3 hours was about all I could take doing the intense work I was doing. So after working from 8 to 11 in the morning, I'd take a walk around the estate with Steve. Then it was lunch. Then work from 1 to 4 in the afternoon, and a couple of hours of reading or television before dinner. Finally, maybe an hour or two of work in the evening before winding down to bedtime. People are going to die! Theresa is so oblivious and so self-centered. Billions of people depend on her figuring this out and learning how to harness Hal's power to find a solution to get rain to fall again so they won't die by starvation, which, by the way, is a really shitty way to die. But she could barely be asked to put in an 8-hour work day. I put more effort into running a YouTube channel. We get more irrelevant diatribes as Theresa talks about other things that don't matter. The sheeple of the world start to worry if Theresa can really be trusted with this burden, if she was being secretive and wasn't really revealing what she was doing. I was the world's worst nightmare. I don't get it at this point. Is she the world's savior, or is she a horrible nightmare? The world's population just bounces back and forth depending upon what's more narratively convenient for Norman. Oh, we get this nice little irrelevant section. So Norman decides to take a paragraph out to complain about atheists. It doesn't serve the story at all. It's just another long-winded, irrelevant tangent that doesn't support the characters or story. My BC philosophy professor warned us not to get into long-winded arguments with atheists. Those who don't understand what they're talking about will talk all day. If you do understand what you're talking about, you can express it in a few simple words like Abraham Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address. This is why you shouldn't explain things to Norman, because he's not going to listen. If you understand what you're talking about, you can express it in a few simple words. Okay? Is that why I'm on page 152 and I know almost nothing about Theresa as a character? Also, Norman has no ground to stand on when accusing someone else of being long-winded. A commenter pointed this out, actually, but Theresa's autobiography was supposedly run down to 3 sentences. I was born, I did some stuff, I was vaporized by a bomb. Okay, then explain the previous 50 pages to that. Oh, actually, I stopped too early. That last section keeps going and contradicts itself. Prime Minister Blair brought out 100 points about me I hadn't thought of myself. This was his Gettysburg Address. The few simple words were expressed in about 100 points. Okay, yeah, that's comparable. And Blair and goes and cheerleads for Theresa again. Her character is impeccable. Her intellect is of the finest quality. No more perfect choice could be found for her task. You know, I started counting how many times the book tried to proclaim Theresa as this super awesome, extra special good girl, and I stopped about 20 pages in because it was impossible to quantify. It just became so tedious that I didn't want to do it anymore. Still finished the book. Blair continues to field questions from the House of Parliament, even though a lot of them are stupid. Does the Prime Minister agree that it may come to pass we have a person in power without democratic representation? Theresa's not an elected official, so this question is baseless. Now, I'm not familiar with British politics, but I'm not really sure what the point of this section is. A woman rose to pose a question no American politician would get away with. But this was not America. Does the Prime Minister agree a man's reaction to criticism is laughter, while a woman's reaction is unpredictable? The House burst out in laughter. It liked nothing better than a loaded question, and this one was a minefield. I guess Blair just kind of pauses because the world held its breath for 27 seconds. Does that happen? I mean, I've seen some footage of parliamentary discussions and debates, it gets kind of rowdy, like weirdly rowdy. Now the whole thing is supposed to be like, what happens if Theresa gets impatient and doesn't like people because, I don't know, they're just worried about her having power. But Blair's response is to cite the Bible and just say, no, I assure you, Theresa's a good person. It is written, worse than death is the life of a fool. But we saw in my talk with her, Theresa is no fool. Woe to thee when your king is a child, says the good book. But Theresa shows lack of response to recent ill events. It is also written, you are the light of the world. A city set on a mountain cannot be hidden. Theresa's works will be seen by all. She can only do good works if she cares at all what we think of her. And we've seen she does. A philosopher who lived a few miles from Theresa's home wrote, in dealing with truth we are immortal, and we need fear no change nor accident. A woman who puts her trust in a higher power will be unchanged. Theresa will remain Theresa. That last quote, by the way, was Henry David Thoreau, writing in Walden. Are you hungry? Is it food time now? And again, this entire paragraph is pretty much just one big telling, not showing display. We have not seen Theresa do any of these things. We have been told that she does these things, and it's tiring and land no clause. I'm just so done with this book. So that's gonna have to do it. I've been filming for a couple of hours now. I think that's enough for another part. I swear I don't actually plan for this to be too many parts. Cats are liquid. It just, there's so much to cover that I lose track of time. So that'll have to be it for part 2. Come back to part 3, when you actually get to see what Theresa's stupid plan to bring back the rain is. Don't look it up. I promise it's much, much dumber than anything you could come up with yourself.
You are not prepared!
Oh, and Norman thought it would be a good idea to break down his plan mathematically and actually give you a lot of numbers to explain how everything would have worked. And as the son of a physicist, I decided to explain numerically why his ideas are supremely stupid. So that'll be fun. Now, I have to feed a cat.